All right, well, sorry for starting a little bit late. People who are maybe tuning in online across the country, across the globe, to our fourth in our spring series, our inaugural spring series at the Imaginative Institute. My name's Daniel Northway Frank. I'm the Institute Director here, and we're very excited to be here for our up-close and interactive VR/AR wrap-up with Nyla Innuksuk. So before we get started, I just want to do that thing I need to do, just let you know what else is happening at the Institute, what's happening leading up to the festival, as it is only 3.5 months away now. So just a reminder to you that the Imaginative Festival is October 17th to 21st, 2018, but the festival's Institute's Industry Days, so our former industry series has been expanded to 5 days overlapping the festival. So this year we run May 15th to 19th. October. Don't come in May. You could. We'll probably be doing something. October. I knew something was looking funny on there. But yeah, we're very excited to be showing a whole lot more content, a lot of upcoming information that we've been doing regarding our on-screen protocols and pathways initiative, some other initiatives that we're doing, a focus on series work at the festival with a public showcase, but also taking time out in the industry to talk about the past, present, and future of series work, focusing half a day on Indigenous children's series, so really taking part of the contributions that have been made and what are the opportunities that we're hearing so much about in the creative space with broadcasters regarding children's content where there is not a lot being made. And then we will be expanding our micro meetings this year, so if you've ever done those one-on-ones, pitch sessions, they're going to be bigger and better and streamed this year, so we'll be having 4 or 5 separate events rather than the one that turned into 2 unexpectedly last year. So pre-development, development, pre-buys, production, festivals, and digital and interactive, so different ways to meet up with different people to collaborate with. And just some other events that are on right now. If you go onto the imaginative.org website, we have our IN Bullseye, Indigenous Emerging Talent Search Contest on right now, so I welcome you all to go on there. On the top of the menu, on the left side, there's the IN Bullseye site where you can go and submit yourself, or we recommend that you just share it with anyone you know from a local community who's a budding, musical artist that could use an opportunity to get professional, have a professional music producer come and work on a couple tracks of your own, and then work on your first Indigenous directed music video. So a really great opportunity with Slate Music. So you can apply now, and it runs until August 15th. And then we have our APTN Imaginative web series Open Call, which will launch on July whatever the Thursday is, I think it's the 5th. So this is our second year giving an opportunity for submissions from our Indigenous Canadian creatives to propose web series. And we have an increased ask this year. APTN is now giving $30,000 production support to the winners this year, and we have a whole package of other things that come along with that, including year-round mentorship. But we've seen some rough cuts from actually the people last year who did it, Madison Thomas and Darcy Waite, who did a project they pitched called COST, C-O-S-T, and we're really excited to be hopefully premiering or giving a sneak peek to that before it goes on to APTN later this year. And then lastly, and part of our pre-festival events is our NFB Imaginative Digital Partnership Initiative. So this is the 6th year running where we provide an opportunity for Indigenous Creative to work with the NFB's Vancouver Digital Studio to produce a digital or interactive work, whatever that might mean. So the idea is that we're doing an online webinar, which is our first time doing that, so kind of doing this, but actually just on computer screens, tapping into the NFB's digital office and engaging some of the artists that have been the recipients over the past years about the diversity of types of digital works that they've made. One's done like an interactive photo essay, one did an on-site installation that was at the Venice Biennale, another one did a site-specific installation here in our former space here, actually, before it was torn up and made beautiful. And then someone did a development on an Indigenous futurism world set in the Peterborough area. So it's really an opportunity to see what are the different types of works and how could you transform maybe one of your ideas instead from a film idea or maybe from a gaming idea into a digital and interactive work. So you get $30,000 to $50,000 of production support for that. So that we'll have that session on July 16th. Yeah, July 16th we'll be doing it. So just stay tuned to imaginative.org for all that kind of stuff. And we're happy to have Nyla here. So sorry about all that information, but there's so many opportunities. It's our job to let you know. But yeah, we really wanted to just welcome Nyla back again. She was here a month ago doing our creative to creative business, starting your own Indigenous production company, and really gave some insight to her evolving business and her experiences at businesses. And so we're really excited just to give her an opportunity to come and share with us all the things that she's been doing over the course of basically the last year with our first VR AR residency. So now that we have this physical space to experiment, to play in, we really want to continue the opportunities to have an artist in one of our different mediums, film, video, audio, or digital interactive media, to come and utilize our resources, our connections, and to explore, what kind of art they can do in here, how can they push forward their form and experiment, give them time and space, and a little bit of money to give that freedom to do that, where you wouldn't be tied to necessarily funding from other ways. So, do you want to maybe just get started and introduce yourself? And
Sure. So I'm Nyla Innuksuk. Thank you guys so much for coming out. It's so nice that it's like I'm not related to everybody, or there's some strangers here. I was expecting it to just be Melissa. I dragged my boyfriend here because I was like, I don't know if anyone's gonna show up.
We're gonna ticket this so we'll know next time.
I know. So thank you so much for coming, and thanks Daniel and Imaginative for this opportunity. It's been, I think one of the things that's really difficult to find in the arts and in tech and in VR is time to just be able to play around with these things, because no one's an expert at VR or AR. Hey, how's it going? So there isn't a lot of opportunity. I do know that guy. This is someone. This is someone that I met through meetups in VR and the VR community, and that's something that I'll kind of address maybe towards the end in terms of opportunities for future residents, artists and residents. Is having the time to be able to go out and explore what people are doing in VR and making those connections, and just being able to have the freedom of creating stuff without it being client driven. So a lot of the work that I do at my company Mixtape is for clients. So that might be an extension of a television series, like one I'll mention. And with those kinds of projects, I really have to do something that I know is going to work, and usually it requires precedent. And so there's a limit on the amount of creativity you can have, and also how far you can push things technically, and also just kind of push to see if things will break a little bit when you're working with a client. So that's why having opportunities like this residency are so great, and being able to kind of engage in the community in that way. So I'm not sure how to switch this.
Oh, I know.
And I could actually start by talking a little bit about the relationship with, so this is Mixtape, that's me. With this project is probably a good place to start, because this was pre-residency. This is a still from a project called The Hunt. I don't know why it looks so pixelated there, but The Hunt was directed by Dennis Goulet. It was part of a larger exhibit called 2167 that was up for the better part of a year, about 8 months, at the TIFF Bell Lightbox last year. And if you got a chance to see it, that was a few different pieces. I produced 2 pieces and was involved in a third. And essentially these were looking at Canada from an Indigenous perspective 150 years in the future, so the year 2167. And it's a kind of a good place for us to start because it's, one of the first, or the first VR project, 360 project and VR with Jeff Barnaby's piece that Imaginative was a part of, and in terms of actually producing work. And so it was, this was one of the pieces, again, by Dennis Goulet. We also worked with Jeff Barnaby on a piece, and I also produced one with Kent Monkman, who is an amazing artist. And what was really great about this project is kind of being able to, Dennis Goulet is a filmmaker, but the other, and so is Jeff Barnaby, but Kent Monkman is a visual artist, to be able to explore new mediums like 360 and VR with artists that aren't necessarily constrained by the ideas within film is really kind of fascinating. Another project that was similar to that was I had done a music video with the group of Tribe Called Red. And that was really a lot of fun because we got to explore with my friend Bear, who's the founder of Tribe. He kind of is a perfect example of someone that comes to VR without pre-existing ideas of what works, and because he's a musician and a visual artist himself, it was we were able to kind of think a little bit outside the box. And with that one, that was a gaze-based sound experience, essentially. So depending on where you're looking within the space, the soundscape is changing. So we had filmed over at Fort York, and on one side you had traditional powwow dancers, and then on the other side you had some b-boys. And essentially, if you're looking at the b-boys, you're going to hear more of the hip-hop influences within the song. If you're looking at the city skyline, you hear more of the electronic elements. And then if you're looking at the powwow dancers, you're going to hear more of those traditional influences of the music. And then that's to an extent that we could do a bit of that within Facebook and YouTube Player. It's best when you're actually in the headset and watching through the app, of course, because that's going to make it more interactive. And we had the added layer of within the app being able to, depending if you're looking at key spots, actually activate certain sounds that would be created based on looking at those cues. And that's something that I've kind of carried on, this idea. I'm really fascinated by interactivity within soundscapes, and 360 omnidirectional sound and 360 sound design is something that I'm really kind of fascinated by. This, I guess, to just start out, I'll also say that this is really casual. So if you guys at any point have any questions, feel free to just shout it out. By no means, I've got my notes here on my phone. I don't have to stick to them. But I'll kind of go through a few of the kind of concepts that I was playing with while I was having this residency, just to kind of the ideas that I was exploring. And with that piece of Dennis's The Hunt, it is kind of this post-apocalyptic experience where you're it's actually, we shot it just at Six Nations, and the idea being that this would be the same space but 150 years in the future, and in that future they're in this kind of police state. People are tracking our hunting and things using these robotic drones. And basically our heroes in this film are reprogramming the drones and creating this resistance and leading to, this future rebellion. And
that's part of that and Bear Witnesses projects were part of. I mean, Sesqui, I think, is that what was Bear part of the Sesqui?
Yeah, so Dennis's, this drone project is part of the 2167 exhibit. Bear's, the Tribe Called Red video was part of a larger project called Sesqui, which had a tour across Ontario as part of this gigantic inflatable dome. And my company built the app that housed all of this stuff, so we weren't directly involved with this dome, but we, the film, which is a 20-minute 360 film, it's really great, called Horizons, if you want to check it out. The app's called Meridian. It's free, and it also includes 6 VR pieces in addition to the 20-minute film. One of which is this music video, and another one that we worked on was a stop-motion project that we filmed up in Pikangikum. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the community outreach that I did within that, as it kind of ties in nicely with the residency as well. So one concept that I'll throw out, mostly because does anyone here have a ton of experience with VR? I know this guy does. So this is going to be kind of old hat to you, but for the rest of you, there's this idea that VR, this is so nice, by the way, to be talking to people that where this isn't completely tired. But there's this idea that VR can be used as a tool to build empathy. It's a concept that was coined by this guy, Chris Milk. Some of his stuff you might have seen if you've, there's one called Clouds Over Sidra, was one of the kind of breakout 360 films a few years ago, and really kind of kicked off these empathy documentaries. And one of the ideas is that, well, if you can put experiences that show other people's, such as with Clouds Over Sidra, it was a Syrian refugee camp. This idea that you can put someone in someone else's shoes, and from that you can gain life experience and build empathy. Obviously, there's a limit to the amount of empathy you can create within an experience. Also, it's questionable whether you can build that or get a sense of what it's like to be a part of a marginalized group when you're watching an experience in a headset that costs $600, and you're kind of in this swivel chair getting to try out this experience, and potentially you've paid for that experience. So that's one of the issues that I have with this idea of VR as empathy. Also, because it is kind of looking at underrepresented groups or marginalized groups, a lot of the time the people that make the content look like my boyfriend, and the people in the sorry, I'll keep on using him. This is probably why he never comes to these things. The white man. No, I'm joking. But the people in the documentaries look a little more like me, and so that's when we're dealing with the power dynamic in that way of the subjects and the people that we're supposed to be kind of building empathy for, are Indigenous groups in Canada. Then it starts to kind of get a little murky. So this is just an example of a tweet from a company in Australia. Our Sydney CEO is using virtual reality to get a glimpse of the realities faced by people who experience this every day. CEO sleep out. So it's this idea of building empathy for the homeless by trying out a VR experience that makes you feel as if you're homeless. And this is one response. Yes, dealing with the virtual cold, the virtual violence, the virtual hunger, virtual untreated illnesses, the virtual despair. So that's an obvious kind of example where it was, just a little tone deaf in presentation and execution. And I think that, when we're talking about examples from Canada and the Indigenous pieces, there's some that have been made by Vice. Some of them have been made by good friends of mine over at Occupied. I've had to kind of talk to them a little bit afterwards. But because one example was of this, these guys over at Occupied, and in partnership with Vice, they had done a documentary that's quite good about the issue of safe water, drinking water in Indigenous communities, particularly in Northern Ontario. The Prime Minister came to Northern Ontario to give out water, and they captured it for this VR experience. And with and that for that you can kind of, one, it's this, you know, raising awareness about the situation of water in healthy drinking water in these communities. Also good publicity for the Prime Minister. But the creators of that piece, while they were filming, they heard that, you know, a few communities away there was a suicide epidemic, and their first instinct was, well, we have to go capture that, right? And it's one of these situations where I don't think if it was if there had been an Indigenous person in the room, maybe we would have been like, oh, that's not our place, or maybe this is. It's this idea of when does these intentions of empathy building turn into cultural tourism, trauma porn, all of this kind of stuff, and try and find that ethical line. And a good, we talk a lot about it in film, and this institution allows this community where we can talk about things like whose story should we be telling and who should be telling those stories. It isn't something that has necessarily trickled down to VR or the tech community yet. If we're telling Indigenous stories, should there be Indigenous people involved in telling those? I think that's something that is important for us to build. Things like this residency that can actually build up those skill sets are a really important way to kind of lead that. And any kind of training, any access to equipment that we can give to Indigenous creators is really the next step. So this is image from Clouds Over Sidra that I mentioned. This idea of perspective in the VR space is something that's really interesting to me. One, because when you're watching content, regular 2D content, and by 2D, you know what I mean, just normal stuff, is that it's a very passive experience. So you're just watching things on the news. And when you're in 360, and ideally when you're wearing a headset, the idea is that you're there where the news is happening. It's very much from a perspective, a curated perspective that you've been given, but rather than just wondering what's happening on the screen, you actually have to ask the question, like, who am I in this space? Am I just a fly on the wall, or am I a character, or do I have like a role or something I have to do within this space? And I think that that's something that is really interesting to explore. I think it also kind of goes back to this idea of who's telling the story, and if we're sharing a perspective of, say, Indigenous people, then we maybe want to be careful about the kind of stories we're telling. Also, it's like, if I was just to read stories about, the community my nephews are from, I would really, and that was how I kind of built my knowledge of, they live in Pangnirtung and Nunavut, it would be a pretty kind of bleak representation of their community. But if I actually talk to them or hang out with them or spend some time there, then I know that it's actually not like that at all. And it's the sense of community is really great. And we all know when we go back to our homes and or to our communities, that it really is, even in the north where it can seem so isolated, you kind of get to know people a lot closer when you're actually in that space. And Inuit are huge laughers. I mean, our entire culture is based on this idea of laughter, whether it's like throat singing, which is a laughing game, or Greenlandic mask dancing. So it's that's something that is part of cultural experiences that you can have, but you're not going to have them if the perspective is being told by outsiders. So that's something that I've been exploring, also something that I've been exploring with just in terms of technique and storytelling. With Danis's piece, we really kind of played with the idea of perspective and how you can tell a story, and kind of shaping it from someone's character. A friend of mine, Ellie Rainey, did a really cool project, actually one of his very first projects, that was kind of neat. I wish I had a clip to show you guys, but it was, actually like taking, being able to switch perspectives with the person you're with. You just like choose to kind of switch, and then you can actually see the world through their eyes, and it was kind of done really well using the medium. And those kind of things are really kind of fascinating to me, and are just a really good use of the technology to tell a story. So Indigenous futurisms is another thing that we've been exploring. I know the Institute's certainly exploring, and I've been playing around with myself and just kind of figuring out what exactly Indigenous futurisms mean. If you're not familiar with Indigenous futurisms, you're probably familiar with Afrofuturisms, even if you're not aware of it. Black Panther is a perfect example of Afrofuturism that is mainstream. And Indigenous futurisms is kind of the same kind of thing, definitely rooted in the same concepts of, some people may interpret it as imagining the world if colonization hadn't happened, and what the world would look like in the present. Another is to imagine the world in the future with Indigenous representation, or elements of geek culture like comic books. And so these are the kinds of things that I think are really exciting, and I think that VR and AR are really exciting platforms to be exploring those within. Not to mention that, even just by us I mean Indigenous people exploring this space and creating works in VR and AR is, to me, a form of Indigenous futurisms. Because if you think about it, our ancestors, and certainly mine, you don't have to look that far, just a couple generations ago, were living nomadically on the land, didn't have communities, and I think about, what is my elders' wildest imaginations of the future, and it probably wouldn't look too far off of, exploring different realities. So I think by just even engaging in this work, it's Indigenous futurisms in practice. So, and it's, for us, it's kind of a form of resilience as well. We are people that we're not supposed to exist in the present this way, in celebrating our culture and proud of our culture and having these traditions like throat singing, drum dancing, Inuit tattoos. We're not supposed to have those in the present. So for us to be able to look into the future and see those things existing and existing with pride is, something that's really empowering. Yeah, kind of went over that. Kent, who is someone we worked with at 2167, is kind of this, I guess I'll skip that, but tattoos, like I mentioned, these traditions that were supposed to have been lost, and almost were lost through colonization, similar to throat singing. And you see someone like Tanya Tagaq, who's revitalized throat singing in a major way, and she's also completely changed it. And I think that that's something that, when I think about futurisms, preserving our culture is really important, and preserving it in a way that's authentic is super important, but also by imagining it differently and imagining it as something that is living and breathing and growing, then we're talking about maintaining our culture for a long time. And so having our tattoos, we may have lost the meanings of what each of the tattoos actually represent, because this was something where, we are lucky enough to have photographs of people with the tattoos, but to, kind of to know exactly what they mean. That's something that has been lost. But what we can do when we're getting our tattoos is imagine what they could mean, give meaning to them. If you have, say, 2 lines in between the kind of Y symbols that you see there, maybe that represents your 2 children. And so it's these kind of things where we have to kind of make it up because that's something that was lost. But by doing that and by recreating those tattoos, we're allowing the tradition to exist. And I was really excited. I've been doing some writing with Marvel Comics. And we've created an Inuk X-Men character, which is awesome, Amka, and she's got the traditional tattoos on her hands and on her face, which was really important to me. Amka also comes from that community of Pangnirtung, so it's already getting way cooler. If you look at Pang in the to get an idea of what it is, now you can add home to a superhero, and also home to girls who fight aliens, which I'll talk about at the end, perhaps. This is something that I think is so cool. It's a piece of art that is by an artist from Cape Dorset. I can find you the name. I don't have it right now. And I remember seeing this at the library in Iqaluit, and it is now, I think, owned by McGill. And I think it's so great because it's in this style of traditional prints, but it's incorporating something obviously so different than what is usually seen in print work, which is often animals, by having an Inuk standing right beside this gigantic stiletto. I think that's like kind of it's an interesting, although the artist probably isn't thinking that he's making Indigenous futurism work, I think that what's so great is, by carrying on the actual technique of printmaking, something that's been around for ages, and applying it to kind of contemporary work is really neat. So some of the technology I've been exploring over the past year has been really exciting. The actual institute has a GoPro Omni rig, which is going to be available for anyone who is part of their future residencies or VR projects. It's a really great camera for beginners because it's all completely self-contained. It automatically syncs the cameras, and I actually have put together some tutorials on how to use the camera. There it is. And those will be available on the Imaginative website. They're on my website now, but we'll share them and get them out there. And that's really just for future people that will be coming into the Institute. Obviously, anyone can watch them, but if you want to, that'd be weird if you're not actually planning to make VR.
Yeah. But we do want to make them accessible. We're going to kind of rent this out as a third party with Charles Street Video, so that way it's accessible, prioritized to Indigenous creatives, but again, so I look forward to you talking more about the experimentation that you did with this that helped inform some best practices to get those people a couple steps further ahead.
And also in those tutorials, there's just tips about shooting 360 in general. You don't have to be using this camera, although the tutorials go into in depth into that particular camera. There's stuff in there that even if you had smaller rigs like the Ricoh Theta or something, I'm sure you could take some of those and just really just learn about how close you can get to the rig, how to set it up, what a good height of the tripod, things like that, that if you're a real beginner and you just want to start exploring, then that's an option. And that's I think what we're really hoping to do is just get people to explore. And it's kind of nice actually, even if for true beginners, to really try and see what works and what doesn't. myself and my colleague Ksenia recently were part of the Indigenous Fashion Week, and we were working with these brand guys. I don't know. They
British brand guys.
British brand guys. Really cool, but they wanted us to make something super rough for somebody as like as part of as an extension of their brand, and they're like, yeah, we want you to break all the rules. And so it was basically like, okay, what are we not supposed to do? And it was a really kind of fun experiment. And those are the kind of things, well, in this case, it was actually what the client wanted, but it was something that I think was a valuable practice, because sometimes happy mistakes happen. Sometimes you find that, oh man, this doesn't look anything like what I was expecting, but it's kind of cool. And having those chances just to kind of experiment is really fun. I also worked with a camera from Google called the Yi Halo. That one was pretty cool. You can see it's pretty big. It's like the size of my head. It's like bigger than my head. I had to send it back. But and that one's 17 cameras. And that one was fun to experiment with as well. It's obviously a lot more data to process at the end, and takes more time. But the actual rig was pretty great. And it was actually a little bit light for me. It kind of felt almost breakable. And the top part just kind of is not connected in any way. So it can just like fall off. But I mean, it's also like heavy. So in order to fall off, it would have to tip over. So it was kind of, it was neat to kind of explore that camera. Also had some time just to experiment with other, some DSLR rigs, and some red camera rigs. And if you're wondering like what it is to kind of experiment with those, it really is like welding cameras together almost, like just building these cheese plates and just like kind of experimenting and seeing what works. And then in the end, you kind of get these interesting looking camera arrays. And got to shoot a bit with stereoscopic cameras. Manual, expert in stereoscopy. So it's all really exciting. It's because it's also brand new. When I kind of started working in 360, these GoPro rigs like the Omni, except for not like the Omni, because we'd have to print them with 3D printers, and so things have changed a lot, but also haven't changed a ton, and that's why it's still kind of a lot of fun to experiment. And if you are wanting to try and build rigs, it's kind of easy enough to find people in the city willing to try it out with you. And that's what's also kind of exciting, is that everything's so new that people are still really excited. One thing that I've been exploring this past year is volumetric capture. I won't talk too much about this because I'm not sure how, but if you guys have questions or want me to talk more about the technology, then for sure, let me know. But volumetric capture is really exciting. Point cloud, essentially you're able to create a very different kind of VR experience, and even like the texture of the air is different when you're using volumetric capture. It kind of feels, there's like a sense of presence that you can create. It also allows you to move around objects. So you can shoot stereoscopically and create 3D VR, but it's still going to be very much like if if I was looking at this microphone right in front of me, I would only really be able to see it in 3D as like standing out from the ground, for instance, but it's still a flattened image. Whereas with volumetric capture, I can actually go like this and see the side of the microphone. Because you can imagine if you're just in filming something with a camera that it's going to be this kind of flat image that kind of warps around you. Now, when you're working with volumetric, you can actually look around to some extent around the space that you're within. And so that's a really kind of the future of VR, certainly something fun to explore. And we.
I just wonder if you maybe wanted to talk just a bit specifically maybe about some of those anecdotal experiments that you did, like that were fun, that were surprising, that were like, okay, I've learned not to do this with our rig, and then going and maybe trying something with the, what were the realizations of using this experimenting, testing, then doing with the Google and then the fashion
with
VR
that
stuff?
one, with the Omni rig, something that was interesting is that because it's all self-contained and you're not supposed to take out the cameras, it means inevitably something's going to happen and you have to take out one of the cameras, and the rig's not built for it. Because the idea is even when you're charging it, it's supposed to all be self-contained. You never have to remove any of the cameras. You can remove the micro SD cards and put them back in, all without taking the cameras out. And there's GoPros are, finicky. Not the most finicky cameras, but they can be a little bit finicky. And sometimes, when you're like playing video games, and some of you will know, when you're playing video games, you have to just blow into the cartridge and then put it back in, and it works. And it was like, what happened? So it's like, sometimes it's just like that. You just have to take out the battery from the GoPro and put it back in, and all of a sudden the camera's working again. But with this, you can't do that. So you actually have to take apart the rig, which, it's more just a pain. If you're on location, you lose a little tiny screw, then it just is, a pain in getting that back. And,
I have a question. That's 360 rig only?
Yeah. So it's not a 3D 360 rig. Which requires a stereoscopic camera. But with, whereas the Google camera is, so there's that benefit. So with that camera rig, for the most part, it's great. The other thing about the original kind of GoPro 3D printed model rigs that you would get, say 4 years ago when I started, is that those, you would have to start each camera individually, whereas with the Omni rig, you just press the master camera and all of the cameras turn on, and then you just hit record and all of the cameras start recording. So it's actually, that's like a really nice thing, and it means if one camera stops working, all the cameras stop working, which is actually a nice thing, because the worst thing with the other rigs was to find that one camera died, all the rest you didn't notice because all the other camera lights are flickering until the end, and it's useless without all the cameras. So yeah, that's something that actually is really helpful, especially if you're kind of getting started. All the clips are the same length. Data management is super important, and there's an entire tutorial on data management, because when you're using 6 cameras or 12 cameras or 17 cameras, it can be very difficult to handle all that footage. So how you label things, if I like to label the micro SD cards and the cameras, and then you have your camera report sheets, and then when you're editing, it should be relatively simple to manage, and then just like how you label your files, all of that stuff is really important to have a process built into it, because it can get so confusing so fast when you're, say, filming a documentary and you're, shooting an hour a day, it's like a 5-day shoot. All of a sudden, you've got 5 hours all all with 6 cameras. It's a lot of data. So that's something that is a key lesson that I learned by error, by messing it up a few times, and just like, you know, it's something that hopefully once you make a big mistake, you only do once or a couple times. The other great thing about this Omni rig is it has a battery, an external battery that can be just mounted to the tripod, because something that you'll want to do is get rid of the tripod in post so that you don't look down and see either just like that or else you know. And there in the tutorial, there's also just a tutorial on getting rid of the tripod, because that's something that's, you know, there's a couple different ways to do it. We found the way that works the best. There's a couple options. Yeah, so that's something that you'll have to do no matter what camera you're using. One of the other things kind of that, you know, that I'll mention is that there's 360 video, and then if you want to add in, say, interactivity, like the Tripod Red project, where you're bringing it into a gaming engine like Unity and adding in interactivity, that's essentially making it so that it's a true VR experience. And that is something that you'll have to watch on a headset or something like the Samsung Gear VR, or the Oculus Rift or the Vive headset. When you're adding interactivity and going to that next level of bringing it into a gaming engine, then, you know, it's not something you can watch on Facebook or YouTube any longer. So something that I've found is when I talk to clients, it's just important to figure out right away what platform they want it on. I remember when I first, because I think I did the first CBC 360 thing, because I remember asking like, okay, so what's this for? And they were just like, so we'll figure that out later. And I was like, oh no, it's actually really important that we figure this out now, because if it's gonna, you know, because if it's going to be for Facebook, there's no point in kind of like making this incredibly interactive project. And at the time, CBC didn't have, well, they still don't have a 360 player. You actually require a special video player. So there's Vimeo, YouTube, Facebook, but CBC player doesn't have the capabilities of showcasing 360 video, and that was going to be their main platform. So we had to just make sure that they could embed YouTube videos, and they also wanted to have it at festivals, which actually do have headsets. So there is that kind of potential to have a version that's for Facebook and YouTube, and then more immersive version that might be for an application or for, you know, installation.
Do you want to talk just a bit about some of the creative, aside from learning all the technicals, yeses and nos and whoopses?
Yeah.
What were some of those fun creative outlets that you've done with fashion and or developing those ideas?
Yeah, even just, you know, it was having a space where you can kind of be like, oh, let's just try and see if this might work. Like, I work with an amazing cinematographer named Ann Tipper, and she is really great at kind of coming up with cool ideas, trying to see what might work. So she created a helmet camera that was, you know, actually was pretty great. The problem is it was just, you have to find a camera operator that's really short if you're using a helmet camera. Otherwise, it's like you're like 7 feet in the air when you're in the experience, and it's really weird. But Anne's quite tall. Yeah, so even experimenting with that, we also built kind of, we got a camera rig that someone in the UK had been building and exploring for VR. We changed it a lot because we needed something a little sturdier, and that was actually used in The Hunt, in Danis's film. So it's like this body mount and it gives like a very specific aesthetic. It's very kind of a stylized look. If you've seen Requiem for a Dream, and you know when the actors are wearing like a Steadicam rig and you can see the camera moving with them, that's the kind of look it gave, but in 360. And it also means that the talent, so the lead actor, was, when you turn around, you can see her face, and she's very close to you. So that was an example of when we were experimenting with perspective. This idea, does it make sense to be a character when you're in the piece, or is it okay to be like a third party but you're connected directly to the character? So that was actually kind of fun, and we ended up going, for the most part, being a fly on the wall, with the exception of our kind of like hero character, who for one traveling shot wears the body mount, and that was just meant that the actor had to carry this kind of heavy. We used a different camera, but this kind of body mount that extends, and so it has this, and we needed stability, because obviously, it's maybe not obvious, you can get really sick when you're watching, and kind of get motion sickness when you're watching stuff in a headset for too much, and especially when there's lots of movement. So this is just a matter of, you know, latency with the headsets. It's, you know, you're used to, your brain computes the stuff from your eyes really naturally. So when I'm moving around and when I'm walking, I don't notice that I'm walking. It feels very natural and straight for me. Also, when I'm looking around at different things, my brain is taking it in at the rate it's supposed to, but within a headset, it's just a couple milliseconds, and you know, it's changing and getting a lot better, but just a couple milliseconds off of what you're used to, and it can make you kind of feel a little bit sick, and if you've got a ton of motion, then it will certainly do that as well. So with that rig and with the helmet, you have to come up with some sort of in the hardware, like a gimbal or something like that, some sort of stability to have it that kind of Steadicam effect, because the jerkiness would just have been too much. So those are kind of things that, you know, you just explore, and again, why it's so great to have that research and development space to explore things like that. And these things cost like almost no money. We used an old helmet. We bought the rig that we changed, but it wasn't that expensive. Yeah, so it's things like that, which were actually really, really fun, and in the end got to be something that was really cool. So we explored stuff with Indigenous Fashion Week. We shot something with Sage Paul, the amazing fashion designer, creative director of Indigenous Fashion Week, with model Jade Willoughby, and that was kind of like we filmed that with a Google camera rig, and it's almost like a dance piece, except for there's no dancing, but it has that kind of artsy kind of thing, and where we have the model multiply and interact with herself within this space. And so that one was quite a lot of fun to make. Our model was wonderful, and we're actually going to be working together again on another kind of project. But one of the other things we filmed was, I mentioned extensions of television series. We're working on a television series called Amplify that Shane Belcourt's directing, and actually a bunch of amazing directors. Zoe Hopkins, who I worked with on a project called Impossible to Contain, which is a 360 documentary for CBC. And Zoe directed a feature film called Kayak to Clem 2, which premiered at Imaginative, and was in theaters up until last weekend. And that film is about the shipment of fuel on the BC coast, and all these like heavy tankers. And the main character in that film is basically essentially protesting these these ships that travel past her community of Bella Bella, and it's her kayak back to her community in kind of protest to these sorts of things. And a week after they wrapped, location in Bella Bella, which is where the community where the film takes place, and also where Zoe Hopkins, the director's from, one of those tankers had a spill. And it basically completely affected her community, which is a community that has a lot of food insecurity already because it's so isolated, and they have to, have lots of subsidies. Food's really expensive, and they're a clamming community and a fishing community, so they rely on the water as just like a resource, and it's something that they that they sell, but also just it's something like 80% of food from in that community is harvested from land, and so it's a huge amount. And so we went and filmed a documentary to accompany the film about that, how it affected one particular family, Zoe's family, and what that spill looked like, and kind of like what it is to kind of be living in this community. And it's close to kind of like feeling as if you're there, and they talk about being able to just smell the oil on everything. So just kind of give that sense of presence and kind of understanding of the situation and how it's affecting them. And so Zoe's another filmmaker that's on this television series, and we just filmed a round dance as part of it. It's a music video that will be airing. Hopefully we might get to, it's a music series, so hopefully we will do a couple other music videos as part of it. But that's something that we've been, kind of developing and experimenting and playing around with since January. Youth engagement. So this is something that I found and I've been really lucky to work with some amazing organizations like Sesqui, which, what we went and visited First Nations communities, including Pikangikum, and it's one of those communities that has a lot of issues with, food insecurity, also housing, overcrowding, and clean water is a huge issue there, and amongst bunch of issues that I know we're all familiar with in these northern communities, and a big one is access. It's one thing to be kind of creating this content as Indigenous creators. Another thing is actually getting it to places where we can see it, and our communities can see it. In Nunavut, internet is expensive, and it's really hard to get. It's slow. And when we're shooting with like a bunch of cameras, it makes the files larger. It makes the videos, because you're now having 360 degrees. When you're on a really shitty internet connection, it makes it that much harder to load. So it's something that's not super accessible. Obviously, the headsets are expensive. So if streaming's out and headsets are difficult to get, having tours like the one that Imaginative has done with 2167, and where it actually goes to communities and is shown there, those are really important. With Sesqui, what I did is because we had done a stop motion project with the community and with the youth, I went back and spent a few days at the high school, putting on workshops throughout the day. And, it was kind of started in the morning and extended way past school hours, because the kids just wanted to stick around and play with it, but also it's like they didn't really have anywhere else to go, so why not stay at the school? And so it was just a couple of days of doing workshops that allowed them to actually see the experience, because I brought phones and I brought headsets, and I left those with the school so that the kids could actually see the thing that we'd made, because otherwise they might not have been. It was actually an app, so it's not something that you can watch in 360 video on Facebook or YouTube. So outside of actually owning a headset, there was no way anyone could actually watch it. So we brought that there. We also brought along the Ricoh Theta cameras, and these are just consumer 360-degree cameras that are super tiny, really thin, and really cheap. And so we brought a couple of those up, and I was doing training kids on how to train other kids using the cameras, because it is relatively simple. It's all one connected system, just two little cameras, and you just click record and it will start recording 360 video, and then teaching people how to offload it, and then bring it into editing software. Luckily, if you've ever edited video before, you'll be able to edit 360 video. It really is the exact same, except for the image is going to be flattened out when you're watching it, and there's software built in, or that you can download for free to watch it in 360 to be checking on your work. But if you know how to edit 2D footage, you'll be able to edit 360 footage, no problem. And so, it was kind of as quick as possible, trying to, teach people how to use these tools, because when we're talking about perspective and who's telling what stories and how do we share stories that are from the community, it's really by giving the tools and the knowledge to people from the communities to be able to tell their stories. So I've been working, like I mentioned, with Sesqui. I'm also working with an organization called Taking It Global, and it being IT. Again, that's workshops, that's providing them with gear. With Taking It Global, we got kids' laptops, cameras, drones, really a lot of great stuff, some software, including augmented reality software, when you are working with 15-year-olds, I'm realizing when you give them software, it's like they can figure it out. It's actually really kind of incredible. But the software is expensive, and maybe you don't have a computer to use it. So kind of getting access to these kind of things is really important, and that's why partnerships like that are important. But also even just taking the time, if you've got it, to volunteer and give these workshops, because it doesn't take a lot of time. And so with Taking It Global, I've also I'm volunteering to kind of be a consultant on the pieces that are being created, because people are coming up with projects, and even when I was in Pikangikum, just giving your email in case people have questions, in case there is one kid that's like super keen about it, and he might be just the one kid in Pikangikum who feels like taking out this camera. But if they're curious, when I was a teenager, how I kind of got into film, it really was, I just watched a lot of stuff. But my brother broke his leg, and my parents got him a video camera, so I would just take it and just make my own. I just learned by doing, and it can seem kind of intimidating when it's VR and AR, but kind of exploring these things, if you can have a bit of access, there's no reason why you can't just be kind of creating stuff. And if we've got affordable rentals for a camera at Charles Street, or you can kind of drop by the imaginative space, or have workshops, or take part of workshops. There's a lot of stuff that you can kind of be doing and creating on your own. So that's something that's super important to me when especially when I'm going into communities and borrowing from them, whether it's just being on their land or having them tell their stories. Being able to give back in a way is really great.
And I think it's great that we're able to with this technology, actually, I mean, it was part of the impetus of 2167 was to, as the language of VR space is new for everyone, getting Indigenous perspectives and voice and creatives access to not be 70 years behind getting a video camera. You can, or a film camera, you're there when everybody else is doing it. So how do you infuse that mindfulness of Indigenous perspective into the work that you're going to be seeing, experiencing, and loving?
And it's important that people and diverse voices be a part of this as we're building this language. Also, it's it's new for everybody. It's not just new for Indigenous people. This is stuff that is really we haven't figured it out yet. So as we're kind of figuring it out, it means that everybody's starting at the same kind of playing field, and there's so that's what kind of makes it exciting. So even when I think about it, when I started kind of getting involved in 360 and VR with the Oculus Development Kit about 4 years ago, it was when we were making stuff, even if it was just building CG worlds in Unity, and it was only for ourselves and our community, people that had developers that had an Oculus kit. It was exciting and fun, but it wasn't intimidating. If you kind of were like, oh well, we all don't know what we're doing. I remember there being probably 3 years ago at TIFF, and TIFF was holding its first VR panel, and they were calling us the experts in VR, and we were all sitting up there and we're like, okay, so you guys aren't experts, right? And they're like, no, are you? And we're like, no. It's like, okay, good, just making sure, because I didn't want to, but it was still kind of and now with volumetric capture, it's also something that's new and people are figuring out. I was just hanging out with some people this morning that had made a piece called The Choice, and they use Depth Kit, which is doesn't even exist really anymore, and they were using it for a reason that wasn't supposed to be how you're using the technology, but they used it to create amazing 3D video. And it's that kind of experimentation that really it has to be someone thinking outside the box, and okay, well, this doesn't exist, how do we make it work? And there's people that are kind of building these volumetric spaces, volumetric capture spaces, which are really crazy. It's so cool if you get a chance to look at it. But there's also things when you're looking for avatars, if online, if you're a game designer, you're creating things, you can get full body scans really easily in the city. You go somewhere and get a full body scan and create an avatar using photogrammetry. But if you look at things, and that's something that might be interesting for Imaginator to explore, because we probably don't have a lot of Indigenous avatars that look like not stereotypical people. Also, female representation. A big thing is that when you look for adult women in these spaces, you're going to get a lot. It's all not safe for work, and you have to because those are the models, the 3D models of women that are being created, and just a push to get more representation of just this is a woman in a purple shirt and khaki pants, and just kind of normalized things. So and that's stuff that's you can. What's so great about meetups, and I'll talk a bit about that, and how it's something that obviously with a residency you have the freedom and the time to kind of go and see different meetups. But if anyone's curious about any of this stuff, going and actually engaging with the community, it's a small community. We all kind of know each other, and it really is because we just it's true about if you're a nerd, it just like kind of means that you're like passionate about something. I mean, they don't talk about it like people aren't like, well, he's such a nerd about hockey, like, right? But like, I mean, with this, it's like we're just really excited about making stuff and testing things out. And so even if it's someone that might normally be seen as kind of inaccessible, like the founder of a really cool VR company. It really is these spaces. It's like we can all get together and just like nerd out about stuff. Because it's like, and Scott can attest to this, you run out of people when you're working in this space that want to hear you talk about 360 and VR really fast. He was very quickly being like, and my dad would just kind of tell people at dinner, like, okay, unless you like want to be stuck for 3 hours, don't ask Nyla what she does for a living, because it really is just like just talk about it all the time. And when I was like first getting engaged, it was like everything seemed like, oh, that would make but how would you interpret that in VR? And so it's at a certain point, the people around you start getting annoyed by this, and you just need to be talking with people. And that's really how I started. It's also how you get to know more about different techniques or different things people are trying out. And someone might be doing something for a documentary, and you'd be like, oh, that would actually work really well, that same kind of concept in gameplay. And so, because with VR, that's something I should probably have emphasized, is I like to focus on stuff, telling stories, essentially. And finding narratives and exploring cinematic VR. I'm also working on a multiplayer video game, and that's really kind of, it's a horror-based game, really kind of focusing on 360 sound design. And I'm also doing a gallery piece that's going to be an installation at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. That's this kind of volumetric point cloud capture thing. And so it really is like a wide, diverse group of things that you can be doing. So, and at first, when I kind of first started and was like, oh my God, everything could be, it starts to wear off eventually, and you're like, oh, maybe that won't make the best experience. Or like maybe someone doesn't need to gamify that. And so I have friends that I have friends that do real estate or travel or tourism. I've got friends that only do games. There's a lot of different kind of stuff that you can do and explore. And I think there's, which is why I also mentioned that just at the beginning, working with people that don't work in film has been really exciting. Obviously, with Imaginative, you're probably going to be working mostly, the goal is to be working with people that are used to telling stories, but may not have had the resources to use new media like VR, or just people that want to experiment with a different medium. And I think that will be kind of an interesting process, in seeing what comes out of people taking part in the Institute and their programs, is kind of seeing what stories will be told. And I think it's...
Yeah, we'll be trying to do that more with digital and interactive stuff. We're working on a new in digital space that will be at the festival in the TIFF main floor. So part of it does involve kind of like an exploratory meetup between lots of different content creators, and also, Globocore, for example, like some of the people who are forwarding the technology or in the diversity of VR experiences. So you might have a creative idea, but you don't know what the outlet is, and then meeting these people and having these little round tables, maybe there's collaboration that come out of that. So yeah, we're excited about it.
And I know it's like, oh, it's not intimidating at all. This company, Globocore, it sounds like Globocore. It's like the evil, like in a comic book, it would be the evil company that's Demolition taking over. Man. Yeah. but they're actually very nice.
So can we share, just if you're interested in VR, maybe we can add it to our website, just some links. Like I know there's like the meetup.com, but if you just want to say one or two of the, if you're interested in going, I've been to one when we were trying to explore this stuff, and it was a really exciting thing that made me just want to I wish I just want to quit and just start doing, I feel like at least once a year I'm like, I just want to go work with Nyla. But it's a really fun, exciting space where everybody's on the same level to a point. And
I can certainly share links, but the VR meetup at Globocore, those are great. There's, and it's, Globocore started to include narrative-based projects. I've found more recently, you found that too, where it did feel very gamey at the beginning. And so they're kind of starting to explore different kinds of stuff, including volumetric capture, narratives. This guy Ellie that I had mentioned is also working on a project about the LGBTQ community with volumetric capture that's really beautiful to watch. And it doesn't look like anything you've seen. It's not super realistic, but it's a very kind of stylized use of capture, and it's really neat. And so that's a great one. Unity and Friends is more for a gaming community. Obviously, by the name, Unity is a gaming platform. But even, TIFF holds a lot of events. They've got a pop series. They also, just as part of their DigiPlay space, had some stuff. They had augmented reality in their main space there when you first walked in. I'm sure I think of a bunch more. The digital dialogue breakfasts at OMDC are pretty great. There's one on Friday, but you can't go to the one on Friday.
But if you, maybe just to cap it off, if anyone has any questions, but is there what is the most exciting, volumetric sounds to be pretty interesting, but what is your thing that you're going out next that you're most excited about?
I think something it fits in well with this too is that I really like when I'm excited about something, I kind of like to look at it in different ways, and there's kind of something interesting that can be done with cross-platform exploring of an idea. So I've got a feature that I'm directing called Slashback, and it's this, what I had mentioned, it takes place in Pangnirtung again. Pang is the most beautiful place. It's also where my nephews live, so I like to fit stuff in there so they can hopefully go visit them. And it's also the most beautiful place in the Arctic, so arguably one of the most beautiful places in the world, middle of these fjords, and in the summer with 24-hour sunlight, it's amazing. And so Slashback's about a group of girls. It's kind of this coming-of-age movie about these girls that chase down aliens and battle them. So pretty scary, heavy sci-fi stuff, lots of fun. And I'm exploring VR extensions of that, because I think that there is something really neat about when you're kind of, and especially when it's a world like this that is imaginary and you can kind of fill it with as much imaginary stuff as you want, to kind of explore it in different ways. So to me, I'm looking forward to kind of, I'm working with a publisher on a short story that kind of takes place within the same world. I'm making this film. I'm going to be developing a VR piece to kind of accompany it. And yeah, so that's probably the one that I'm most excited about.
And puppets? Are you doing puppets?
Puppets?
No.
Oh yeah, no.
I was kidding.
Oh.
Of course you're doing puppets.
I've been I swear, I've been pushing for this puppets in VR thing for the longest time. It actually is really cool, but I won't bore you with it now. I will fight for that, and I will make it one day. Using
I had no idea.
puppets.
I was just joking.
No, it's a very good guess. I've been advocating for
Well,
puppets.
we're trying to get Sesame Street coming to Imaginative this year, so
Yeah,
maybe we
there we
can
go.
make some puppets. We'll have a puppet
I'll do some
workshop.
prototypes before.
I'm serious, they're coming. Well, does anyone have any questions at all? I know it's a lot of information and maybe a lot of new information, but I mean, yes.
Super new to this, and
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned up front. It's refreshing to speak in front of a crowd that might not so immersed in this. I am definitely one of those. This raises tons of questions in terms of fascination, but as well as implications. One of the things I would love to hear you talk a little bit about is this idea of democratization of this technology, but also in terms of the medium. Empathy is a theme that comes through. I can definitely see how this enables people to start telling stories that can really help the general public start to understand, perhaps, the lives of people who are in these situations that we need situations that demand a bit of empathy.
Sure.
But I also wonder, like in this age of democratization, I'm thinking here today,
Yeah.
in terms of the types of narratives that are being told, whether it's through social media and the rise of these new voices that perhaps were fringe at some point.
Yeah.
But are no
So
longer.
what kind of narratives are being told?
VR as this tool to really allow people to immerse themselves in these worlds, some of which might build empathy, but others which perhaps might do the opposite. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, one quick thing I'll mention is that I was part of this empathy series at House of VR, great arcade if you want to try out VR. It's on Queen and Bathurst, and they were having an empathy series. There was 3 parts. The first one was called Empathy First Nations, and Dennis Goulet and I were invited to be a part of the conversation, along with my friend from Occupied, who had done the water shortage piece with Vice. So we were speaking at that panel, and both Dennis and I were like really confused about why we were invited with that particular piece, because as I mentioned, it's about this badass girl in this community 150 years in the future who's shooting down robots, reprogramming them, and like building this rebellion. And we're like, why is it part of an empathy thing? And then we realized the only thing was that it was an Indigenous project and it had brown people in it. And we were like, oh man, like this is, they just assumed, we're like, did they watch it? But it was kind of like, they just assumed because it's an Indigenous produced piece, it has Indigenous subject matter, that it was a piece that required empathy to watch, which was really interesting to me, because of course that's not what, and we started hearing people being like, yeah, I don't really understand where empathy came into play, and which made me feel really good. It's like, yes, okay, people aren't terrible, but it was, yeah, so it's, that's kind of an interesting thing that I've kind of just found, but in terms of what narratives are being told, it's such early days, we haven't figured it out. There's not a ton. We haven't had like these blockbuster narrative piece that's kind of led the way or shone light on what we should be doing. But and actually in the city in Toronto, there's not a ton of people exploring this. But which is surprising, because we have a lot of resources here in the city, including Pinewood Studios and White's, that are kind of supporting people in creating narrative work. It's that there's still a lot of technological stuff that's keeping us from making something that's a real standout. So there's one of the leading companies, it's called Felix and Paul. They're based out of Montreal, and they're doing they had a film called Mayubi that I thought was quite good, and and even that's a couple years old now. Documentary, I consider docs, they're telling a story, but and docs are very good for the medium. Horror is also something. Horror, sci-fi, film noir are really interesting things to explore in 360. Sci-fi, because you can kind of, the scenario works really well because you can be playing around with, like I mentioned, Ellie's piece about switching perspectives using technology. My friend and I had pitched this film way too early because there were no consumer headsets out yet we thought we could make a VR feature. And with that was a sci-fi premise, this idea of being able to record people's memories and play them back later. All of those kind of things work well. Horror, you can kind of imagine this idea of being in a space and being able to look around you in 360 degrees. It works really well for the genre. Film noir, same kind of thing, trying to figure out, there's been some kind of playing around with interactive, and this is kind of a bigger topic, but in terms of being able to tell a story without making it feel too much like a video game. Because essentially you want to make that interactivity invisible. Because if you're trying to get engaged in a story, if you're constantly looking around and being like, oh, I wonder if this is supposed to trigger something, or am I supposed to be able to look at that door and it glow bright blue so I know that I can travel through it? Like, those are kind of things that can take you out of a narrative. I think that's our time's up. Yeah, so it's short answer is we haven't really figured it out, but people are, and that's kind of the fun right now, is exploring these ideas.
Cool. Well, that's a great way to end this lovely session. And thank you to Nyla for coming. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
And online, there's one. Oh, we have an online question. Yes.
Jacqueline commented, VR is being used by UofMB in Alzheimer testing. So do you?
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even bring this up because it is not my place of expertise. I am not a scientist yet.
Her question is, are there any plans to go to any communities in northern Manitoba?
In northern Manitoba, not me personally.
We could.
Imaginative could.
We could. We can bring our 2167 is traveling everywhere, and it's just a matter of finding people who can make people come and experience this stuff. So in a community center for a couple days, we're working on just completing an app to make it a bit more accessible, hopefully, to other communities. But yeah, you can reach out to us. We do a tour every year, a national tour that runs roughly it's getting bigger, running from November until June now. So yes, you should message.
Jacqueline's my cousin, so we can talk.
Oh, Jacqueline. All right, we'll talk, Jack. But anyway, yeah, thank you so much for coming. Enjoy. We still have some food and drink out there. We haven't even eaten the food, but let's finish off that food from Cookim Kitchen, who's an Indigenous caterer here in the city. And please enjoy. And thank you so much, Nyla, for coming and spending time with us.